Okay, everyone saved their work. A couple of things we're going to do before we move on. Though the camera stuff is wonderful and lovely, we need to do what we were kind of doing last week and in the first session actually, where we're separating performance and filmmaking. You know, so animation and performance and the great character moves, so that's one thing, but the actual content as it appears in a sequence, that's something else entirely. So what we want to do is kind of remove the distraction of whatever fantastic, wonderful camera animation we've done and just go back down and really focus on the character. So that is what we're going to do. And the way that we're going to do that, I did it again. The way that we're going to do that is just by making our camera invisible. Sorry, I'm going to make my master peg small. What I've done with the camera, it is there. Look, that's my kind of camera view, and it does exist. And if I now scroll through this, you'll see my camera view kind of moves because I did some like crazy animation with it. There you go. It kind of goes like that. So that's the thing. But what I'm just going to do is go over to the little icons in my timeline. I'm going to make the camera invisible, and I'm going to make the camera's peg invisible. And what that does is the animation still exists, but I now can't see it. So my camera view is now static again. Sorry, let's go fit to view. Yeah, so my camera view is static. That's it. Nothing else to concern myself about at the moment. So it's really helpful just to kind of remove anything that's a distraction, focus on what matters. What we're now going to do is we're going to go down into our master squid system, and we're going to start adding bones to some of our elements. So I'm going to start with one of the long tentacles. So I'm going to go to LT1-P. So long tentacle 1-P. To help it stand out a little bit, you might want to do the thing where you kind of like break the view down slightly. So I always tend to put lightbox mode on. I find that quite helpful, just to let you see things a little bit clearer. What I'm going to do though is I'm actually going to select the peg. I am not selecting the drawing. So I'm on the peg, the red peg. It's gone red because animate mode's off. If your animate mode's on, it will be yellow or a yellowy green. So yeah, I'm just going to turn that off for a moment. What I'm now going to do is start using my rigging tools. Your rigging tools are up here. They should be, if you're in default view, they should be sitting across the top right-hand corner of your screen. If you can't see them there, just right-click and select deformation or deformation, and it will bring up all of those tools across the top there. The one that we're kind of interested in is the rigging tool, which is the tool here, the hammer and the spanner. I'm going to put animate mode back on, and the reason I'm putting it back on is because I want to be able to quickly adjust. Like I want to see it moving, like without too much problem. I would recommend if you're just rigging characters, and this is something we'll get into in a little while actually. But if you're just rigging characters and you're not even going to animate them in this scene, yeah, you're just using Harmony as a rigging system, like a character building tool, you would probably have animate mode off. Yeah, you're just going, this is static, I'm not making a film, I'm just making a character at the moment. So you keep animate mode off. So I've selected the peg and it's gone yellow because animate mode's on. And I did have my, so that's what it looks like, it's just highlighted out. Transform mode kind of brings it up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up and I'm going to select my rigging tool. Hello. I've got one there. I don't want that. Sorry, I just saw that I had a... yeah, I've got one in place and I really don't want that there. There we go. Yeah, really didn't want that. So I've selected my rigging tool, which is this one just here. I'm just going to center my image because I want to be able to see the whole tentacle. And now what I'm going to do is build in the bones for this tentacle. And remember, I'm on the peg, not on the drawing. Okay, I'm definitely on that peg layer. So my anchor point, so my starting point for the bone is down the bottom here. Do you remember how we said about the they move in a forward kinematic manner? So I'm going to just click, just one click, and that adds the first joint. I want these to be really kind of fluid and flexible, so I'm going to add a couple of points in here. I'm going to add one there, and you'll see it. So it's another click, and that adds the bone in. I'm going to add another one around here, so sort of 2/3 of the way from the last point. Yeah, so about 2/3 of the way through. Then I'm going to add another one just before the end, and then my final click at the end. That's it. So just before and then at the end. Now what I'm going to do is go in and actually define the flexibility and the curve of that joint. So the way to think about this is if it is a large circle, it has a very shallow curvature and a shallow bend point. And if it is a small circle, it has a very tight, very intense joint. Okay, so my top one, I'm actually going to keep this fairly large because I want it to be very, very flexible. So yeah, I'm going to go to about there.
How do you change the curvature?
So what I'm doing is next to each circle, you've got, so if I zoom in here, you've got the center point of the joint. Bear in mind, I'm still in rigging mode. The center point of the joint and then the curve, the actual joint size manipulator, joint scale manipulator. So it's actually grabbing that handle that allows me to move it. One of the other things I'm thinking, so remember we were talking about like you've got to think about the squid, like how does the squid move? I'm thinking that actually it might work quite nicely to have the curve quite high up. So what I might do is actually move this one a little bit closer. So I've moved this up a little bit and then made it larger because I want the actual angle to be relatively close up here. I want it to be quite close to the body. But you'll see when I've done that, it's actually moved the rest of the joint up, so I might have to move these back. So this one, I'll drag that way a little bit, and then I might take this one and move it up slightly as well. And now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go into my next joint and go, right, that one needs to be, you know, this big. I'm also, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to try to make these kind of as flexible as possible. And one of the ways to do that is actually to maybe think about adding bones, adding a joint. And one of the ways to add a joint is you can't click, say I've got a gap here, so I've got this joint which is fine, I'm happy with, and I've got this joint which I'm not happy with. I can't add one in between. It doesn't quite work like that, from based on my knowledge anyway. So what my preferred method here is if I'm not happy, I'm going to move this one up slightly. So I'm going to move it to around there. And then I'm going to click once more on the end to add another one in. So now I can create kind of closer to the joint I wanted. I'm going to move it this way a bit. That's it. So that's a little bit closer to what I was after. So I've actually added a whole nother joint in here just through assessment. The other thing I'm looking at is a change in behavior. So what's happening here, have you noticed how the circles get smaller? They're kind of scaling down as they move across. The reason for that is I'm thinking about articulation. You know, I was saying like they're forward kinematics. They move from the shoulder effectively. When you think about our bodies and how flexible they are, we tend to do our more refined movements towards the end of our limbs. All the detailed movement is in the wrist. It doesn't move more necessarily than the shoulder, but it's just a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more controlled. Tighter turns, quicker movements as well. Our shoulder joint only tends to do big dramatic sweeping movements, yeah? Side to side, up and down. Whereas our wrist can do lots of small, delicate movements. And I'm thinking about the same thing with the tentacle. So maybe the big sweeping arcs of movement are going to be higher up, closer to the base, and the tighter, kind of smaller, more delicate movements are going to be further down. And that's why I've designed the arc and the scale of the joints the way I have. And right at the end there, I've kept that one really, really tight. I mean, you could even get a little bit silly with it. Not silly, that sounds petty, but you could get very detailed and very kind of granular with it if you wanted to, by adding another joint that's even smaller and even more delicate. So you've got something like that, where it goes right down into like a, so you could even like curl it round almost. So once I've done that, I'm just going to walk you through some of the other tools. So when you've got lots of rigging, and you'll see this in a little while, sometimes you need to isolate one because they all start to sit over. You think all these circles will start lapping over the top of one another, and it can get quite visually confusing. So this is a good tool to just highlight the one that you're working on, especially if you're animating. And then you can also kind of do the resets. So if you've done a movement with a keyframe, you can reset it to where it started. So this is my starting position. Something important to remember is when we're in rigging mode, so when we've got this tool active, we can move this and it doesn't affect anything else in the hierarchy. It's almost like floating above. So this is just where we're designing the bone. It's not until we actually drop down into transform mode, which is where I've just gone. So I've selected transform mode. Now when we move it, you'll see that it actually has a relationship down the hierarchy. So what do I mean by down the hierarchy? Well, let's take a look. Can you see what I mean about those big sweeping movements? It's a much larger sweeping movement. Now if I go down here, by comparison, little tiny movement. Yeah, a little bit more, oh, not that, deformer only, please. Yeah, just kind of delicate, small, delicate movements. There we go. Yeah, so I'm getting something a little bit more. You can change these. So if you feel like, oh, I just want momentarily for this movement to smooth out a bit, you can actually grab the handle. But can you see what happens? When you increase it in transform mode, it actually fundamentally affects the behavior of the drawing, yeah, because of the hierarchy, which we'll look at in a second. And you'll see now that I've moved this, can you see how it's added a keyframe in under the deformation layer? It's actually added key information. So I'm just going to straighten this out. And I'm going to kind of set my starting movement. So what do I mean by my starting movement? Well, I want it to begin the right way. So I'm going to kind of have it with a little bit of curve. Yeah, maybe like that. Not too much. So that's kind of my starting position for this shape. If I were then to jump up to like my end frame and then just pull this down, so it's like, oh, and then it ends like that, I don't know. You'll see that it does that animation for me automatically. Yeah, I don't want that end shape, that's silly. But that's just an idea. Now, can everyone just take a moment to set their bones up? And once they've done it, once you've just done one bone, just do one, okay? Once you've set it, jump to your node view.
That was kind of confusing.
Yep.
Yeah, I was actually trying to. I think it's because I'm in camera mode.
Okay. Yeah, it's this little circle. Yeah. Right. Okay, Tom, what's up?
No, I didn't.
All right.
I think I'm good.
You think you're okay?
Yeah, thank you.
So what is that red thing your camera?
Yeah.
Okay. Just nudge it somewhere out of view because you don't want to get distracted by it. Okay, what's up? So you've done it. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
So, wait, I do actually want to see. So when it goes like that,
yeah,
it'd be nice if like should I put maybe another like thing here?
Why?
So that it kind of goes out, swinging out instead of
What do you mean
like
swing out?
kind of bends out instead of going like that.
Smooth it again. Let's see the movement. Yeah, it depends what side you grab it from.
I
So you're grabbing it from either side of an anchor point. We can go into this in a little bit as well, actually.
Okay.
So the reason I wanted you to go to node view is because I'd like you to start looking at the way that objects really relate to one another, and understanding the node view. Like node view not only helps you understand how an object is made and what hierarchy truly means, but it will also help you understand where you can start dropping things into that hierarchy in order to create some really cool effects. There's one in particular I want to do, and I've forgotten how to do it, and I know just by going into the node library I'm going to find the tool that I'm after. But one of the things I want to do is my pupil, I want it so that the pupil of the eye of my squid, when I move it to the edge of the eye itself, of the white, that it actually disappears behind a mask layer, so it's actually inside the eye almost, yeah? I know that I can disrupt the hierarchy in node view with a tool that will allow me to do that.
Cutter.
Is it the cutter? Thank you, yeah. Well, so I know that exists, and I know it's just a simple drop-in to do.
Can you also like mask it to the eye?
Yeah, so it's effectively that. It's a mask, so that it sits inside the outer shape of another art file or another drawing. What if I want to do three-dimensional lighting, like a bump map lighting? To do that, I need to disrupt the hierarchy and actually impact the way objects relate to one another. So what I mean by that is looking at these relationships. Here's my deformer. So I'm just going to pull this one up slightly, just so it's kind of separated from the others. You see how the deformer rig that I've created sits between the drawing, so the LT_1, so long tentacle 1, drawing, and its peg. It actually sits as a layer between the two. So there's a relationship established here. That means that I can grab my peg and move it, and the deformer, so the deformation rig, the bones, and the drawing have to follow along. Yeah, so I can move it. Think about it in terms of animation. Yeah, I can move it from one side of my frame or my stage or my scene or whatever to another, and the bones and the drawing follow along. But whilst it's moving one to another, I can tell the bones to do all sorts of crazy stuff, and only the drawing has to follow those commands. Okay, so it's a true hierarchy of behaviors. All right. This one listens to everything above it. So the drawing has to follow the instruction of the deformer or the deformation rig and follow the instruction of the peg, which of course has to follow the instruction of the body. The deformer rig doesn't have to listen to anything in the drawing, okay? Doesn't have to follow the drawing. The drawing can change and the deformer rig can stay exactly the same. Think about what we were talking about where you rub a frame out and redraw it, yeah, recolor it or whatever it might be. So I can make those changes. They won't affect the deformer rig. But if I change the peg, the deformer rig has to follow along. And it's really important that we get our head around that, because this complexity of relationship is much easier to understand in this view than it is in this view. Okay, this view down, this is not friendly. This doesn't actually help us understand. It helps us understand direct relationships. So for example, I can see the relationship between ST1's drawing and ST1's peg. What's quite difficult to see is what is the relationship between ST1's peg and the pupil? How do those two relate to one another? Because following it up and then down, it's not nearly as intuitive as just being able to look at this and go, oh right, there is no relationship. You know, they don't exist together. So, yes, go on, Tom.
It might be a silly question, but like if you're not animating with kind of puppets and rigs, just traditionally, do you still need to use the node view?
I think it's helpful to, definitely, so you don't
What do you use it for in that case?
just to see the relationship between the pegs and the drawings, and primarily their relationship to the composite. So if you're animating but you want two objects that are both hand-drawn to pass one in front of the other,
So
but you don't want to start doing...
the whole scene, like, or...
Well, yeah, it's not just the scene. It's thinking about, if you don't want to work in like perspective view, you don't want to start thinking three-dimensionally, but you will want to ensure that some objects are in the foreground and some are in the background. The node view and just understanding the composite relationships down here is how you ensure that pass in front and pass behind happens.
Right, I get
Yeah. So you can still, the node view still has its value. Go for
Can
it.
you keyframe the node view? So like something goes in front and then after that you make it go behind.
That's composite.
Yeah, that's like well, you can. but it requires a separate one of these little fellas. It requires a separate one of these. So you do basically what's pre-comping. I don't know if there's any pre-comping in like Photoshop and After Effects. You pre-comp, you embed one thing into another. So you can do that. Pass forward, pass behind. I'll be honest. The simplest way to do it is to just keyframe the Z-axis on the. You can do it to trick. To eventually trick the composite to think you're in front at one point in time and behind at another. That's fine. But a simpler way is to just nudge F and B. So this shouldn't really even be talking about this. But let's go to this peg. So this is short tentacle 1 right in the middle. If I click on the yellow, it gives me kind of the basic information about where this object is. So you've got, it's not 3D enabled, but it does exist on 3-dimensional paths. So it does exist on an XYZ axis. If I change that Z axis to 1F, sounds like it makes no sense at all. But what 1F basically did is it nudged it 1 point forwards, one tiny step forwards. You could even do it 0.5F or 0.002F would just nudge it forward the tiniest amount so that anything on 0 goes behind.
You got that?
Yeah, and I think you should be able to see this as well.
Can you split the layer like you would do in a timeline? So you have 2 of the same, but then you put them on other arrangements. So
What do you mean split the timeline?
Well, I mean, if you would do this in After Effects, you would just split the layer. You just have, okay, this one goes over, this one goes over.
Yeah.
But then we're talking like a normal kind of timeline.
But that's effectively what you've done here.
Yeah.
But you're doing it in space as opposed to in a timeline.
So you have 2 basically, one that's beneath, one that's over.
Oh, you mean like duplicating them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that works as long as you're only 2D comping.
Yeah.
Like as long as everything's flat, vaudeville, theatre, just completely flat, that's fine to double something up so it's in front and behind because there's 2 of them.
Or more complicated?
That's far more complicated because as soon as you move the camera, you'll get these, you could run risk of duplication. If you don't time the visibility keyframes right, like making it visible, not visible, you could end up with weird duplication. You'd be better off just doing, can you see what I've done here? That was 1F. And if I just go to perspective view, can you see how it's sitting in front? So maybe 1F is a bit strong. Maybe that's a little bit too much. So let's go back in. I don't know. It used to be lower integers. It didn't used to let you do it at this level. But that let me, so that's a positive. So now if I go back to perspective, so you can't even see it. It's so minimal. It's like the tiniest. I can't even get close enough to show you that it's in front, but it is ever so slightly just in front of the other objects. So it would always be at the front. And yes, you can, if you go into, so if I go into this, this is going, we've gone so far off tangent, thank you.
Yeah, don't worry. I was just curious.
Yeah, you can actually keyframe these as well. So you can set them to behave over time if you wanted them to, using like the graph editor and stuff. So it can go from in front to behind. I personally prefer to do that in perspective view, so I can physically move stuff. Some animators do work purely in graph, like in a graph editor, and calculate that way. That to me is like, it's cool, but it's not fun. Like it's not necessarily as visually intuitive, especially as, let's all be honest, we're using this because we're not 3D animators. Like if we were 3D, we'd do doing that, or we're doing this. So you've got to kind of be honest with yourself. So F means forward, by the way, and B is back. So I'm just going to return that to its previous state. So yeah, now we've got a clear understanding of a relationship. What I would like everyone to do is the rest of them. Yeah, so don't do the body, because we're going to do the body ever so slightly differently, but do all 4 of your tentacles. You can copy and paste. Don't always recommend it. Mainly because maybe you don't want them to be rigged exactly the same. Like it'll feel a little bit too symmetrical, and asymmetry is where the true beauty lies, not in symmetry. Okay, so maybe think about doing it a different way. It's like 12:15. Where has the day gone? Okay, I'm going to start sort of clicking through mine. I might do a little bit of kind of cheating. So.
If you kind of made too many, how do you just delete
If you've done too many, Command Z, just walk backwards is the safest way to do it.
We're just doing the legs, right?
Yeah, just do the legs for now.
But if I've moved them along and I'm happy with the arches and I just want to delete some dots, do I have to go back all the way?
What you mean? You're happy with the ones you've got up here,
Yeah.
but you're not happy with the ones you've got here?
Yeah, I made too many.
If you Control Z, it will start here and remove them one joint at a time.
So won't it delete my progress with the arches?
No, it should.
Oh, I see.
It shouldn't.
thank you.
Yeah. Right, I need to move. So, in case anyone's interested, I've just completely cheated. I'm not joking. I did just 100% cheat. But I don't care. So I'm just bringing, I did a quick copy and paste. I'm going to do a completely different set of rigs, I think, for the other one. So let's bring you down there. Okay. Okay, that's not great. So I know you're all concentrating, but I am just going through the exact reason why you don't cheat at the moment. Because you have to reorder these and reconsider keyframes, reconsider the position. Even if two drawings were identical, it doesn't mean that their positioning was identical. So you need to completely rethink that.
You mean about copy and pasting?
Yeah.
I don't cheat.
Yeah, it's exactly why you don't cheat. So that's kind of what I've got at the moment. And then this one is for this drawing, and it needs to go kind of hoping. Oh, not that. Cheaters never possible, as they say.
Oh,
60.
Does it automatically do deformation?
What do you mean? In what sense do you mean?
I did my rigging, but I didn't remember pressing deformation, but it's on it.
Yeah, it should. It's so in rigging it. What you mean in adding the bones? You're talking about, yeah?
Just that deformation thing you see on the node.
Yeah, it automatically does it.
Yeah, it will automatically do that. That's
That's very nice.
okay. So now we're gonna do this properly this time without any horrific.
How can you change the time?
Sorry,
How can you change like the pacing?
the what? Sorry,
Pacing.
pacing. Well, that's just keyframing it. You need to decide when things are in certain places. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to have another crack at this.
Or just like, yeah, but like the other floors in between. Like steps. Yeah. So in the I was thinking that down, so like would be pretty cool. Don't worry. No, it can be just left because he fires it. So just make that match up. On each floor.
There we go. That one's all done. Oi. That's fine.
So you have to.
Yeah.
Okay, that will do. Short. Go away. Short. I'm catching up with you lot slowly. Very slowly. Right, that'll do.
Dan,
Yes.
how are you isolating the rigs like that. And I did.
Okay, sorry. Right. Yeah, I'll explain that right now. So I'm hoping you kind of are at a point where you've got the 4 legs done. Are you talking about how did I click and not
Yeah.
click the drawing?
I've got like all the circles visible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Confusing.
Okay. So the way that we kind of get our heads around that is I've got animate mode off for starters. Okay, I'm not got animate mode on. I'm using my transform tool down the bottom here. And in the transform tool options, you want to make sure you've got this selected, which is peg selection mode. So select that. That will prevent you from accidentally selecting a drawing. Okay, so if you've got peg selection mode on, excuse me, it should just select pegs. Okay, and then the other thing is in the deformation rigging tools up the top here, you've got this one which says show selected deformation chain and hide all others. When you click that, now right. So if I click a tentacle, blimey, I'm just going to select this tentacle. If I click that, it will just isolate that tentacle. If I select the body, do you remember that hierarchy that I keep banging on about? When I select it there, it shows me all of them. Yeah, because they're all part of that hierarchy. They all sit below it. So you should have something, when we go back to our node view, you should have something that kind of looks, on my camera out there in the dark, just ignored. Yeah, you should have something that kind of looks like this, where you've got a drawing that leads to a rig, that leads to a peg, that leads to a body. And that's why when you click to the body, you get all of the deformation rigs visible. They all pop up kind of together. Okay? So just take a moment to make sure you've got that set up. Did this work? But yeah, just take a moment to make sure you've got. How are we getting on? Anyone got any problems? What's happening? Okay. Right, so just click on one of the other legs. Right, now let's show this one up here. The one next to it. So it does exist. And then click on your actual body. Oh, have you got the? Sorry, go to the transfer into it. Go to your tool properties. peg selection tool. Right, now click here. Right, now click this button up here. Right, so they all work. It is all working. Yeah. This can be kind of overwhelming to see all of the rigs together, especially when you start to get into like the really weird stuff like deformers on things like eyes and jaw shape. Jaw shape deformers are awesome, like because you can just like you can have like the we did the drawing replacement tool. I showed you how you like draw 5 things and delete them. You can scrub back and forth between them. So you can draw like 20 mouse shapes, or even import them because Toon have a library of mouse shapes that you can just have. And then you time the mouse shape changes, and then just time the deformer for the jaw. So the shape changes, but the jaw moves as well and kind of wobbles around a little bit, and it actually looks good. It's believable. Okay, what's up? Okay, that will look fine. Yeah, if you're adding another button, you need to get this keyboard right up front as well, because you're going to use it. You've added too many buttons in there. So basically, every time you click, you're adding another one. So you might need to Control Z to go backwards and remove those buttons. Command Z, not Control Z. Yeah. That's it. Possibly that one as well. So that's one too many. That one next to it. Yeah, right, just want to see that. You click so many times, you kind of go like that, and then it goes all the way back this way. You've got like double the amount of range you need. My recommendation, find that deformation thing down here, delete it, and draw the bones out again. You've got quite a lot there. Okay, right, I want to show you, because we are starting to run out of time. This has taken a little bit longer than I had initially planned, and for that I'm very sorry, but at least it gives us some stuff to do after Easter. What I want to show you is just the other rigging process, so the other way to add a deformer that behaves very, very differently, and I think this one can be really nice actually for a different kind of movement. I think that's my big bugbear with heavy cutout animation. Is that it's not that it's cut out, it's that all the cutouts move the same. They have the same sort of series of behaviors in terms of motion. And I think that's something that we can adjust just by doing different forms of rigging. So what we're going to do with this one, we're going to go back to our camera view. We're going to go up to the body. And then what I'm going to do with the body is actually add in different kind of rig. So the way I'm going to do this, normally you would go click, 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 yeah? This time we're going to do it 2 ways. I'm going to show you from the base to the tip, and then I'm going to show you tip to base. So from base to tip, so I'm going to click and drag to about halfway. And then, oh yeah, of course it's going to affect the others, isn't it? Right, sorry, I'm stepping backwards because I don't want any of this junk involved. So, what's the best way out of that? There we go. So I basically just jumped out to something that had no rigging attached to it. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the body peg, that's it, and maybe rig from there. If it still affects it, I might actually rig the drawing itself, but I tend to prefer not to. I prefer to rig the pegs because it keeps a cleaner kind of relationship between the objects. But yeah, it's click and drag, and then click. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do the drawing. So what's happening here is it's kind of messing up the hierarchical states. So if we go up to node view, yeah. So this is basically what's happening. Is that because I've gone through the peg, it's actually having a relationship with all of the other stuff that's connected to all the other pegs are kind of coming in.
Node of the actual body itself.
Sorry?
Why not make a node of the actual, like a duplicate?
Yeah, well you can do a duplicate, but the other way you can do it is to just offset the connection. So I could do it here if I wanted to. So by disconnect, so this is very odd. So basically what's happening is, the different type of deformation rig that I just added is talking to all of the other deformation rigs. I don't want that to happen. And you can see it here. Can you see all the lines that are coming out and going into these other nodes? I don't want that. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to disconnect from the curve and connect straight to the body. So disconnect from that curve, connect to the body. And this should stop that weird little bit of communication happening. If it works, when I go back to my camera view, those legs should be back where they live. There we go. So all I've done there is I just had a conflict. It was a case of, it's a bit like the eyes. You know, like you don't want the eyes doing weird stuff? Yeah, actually, I don't want the eyes doing weird stuff. I'm going to disconnect the curve and go back to the body. So what I'm saying here is I'm kind of chopping things up and saying, look, I want you to move, so my body shape, but I don't want my eyes to move. I don't want that movement to affect all the limbs. But what I do want is when I click that body peg, I want everything to move together. Yeah, I want to keep control over that larger body of movement. So that's why I was thinking the eye. I wanted to separate the eye as well. So now when I go back to the actual camera view, what I've done here is this click and drag system. I'll go back to transform. I'll just zoom in a bit. You've got a couple of different handles. You've got a top handle here, which flexes this way. Okay. And then you've got a curve handle here, which flexes that way. So it's more like a Bezier curve than an actual joint. It can be a little bit temperamental, especially if you haven't got good quality lines. So this, to do what? So this was click and drag and then a click. So if I go back, I'll undo, go back to rigging mode. No, I'm not, because I don't want to undo all the good work I just did. Node view. Sorry, apologies. I'm going to just delete this. I haven't deleted the one. That's the one I just do, which was click and drag, and then click. So that's that one, and then I'll go back to camera mode and I'll do it again. So I'll go to the body. No, I didn't. I went to the pupil and went. All right, just show me that, and then I went to the body, and I did click and drag and click, and I'm going to do it the other way now. So click and drag, and then click. The same crazy relationship just happened. So there it is. Can you see how it happened again? And I'm just going to correct that by remove this, connect up there. So I'm just severing the connection between the tentacles and the curve that I created and the eye as well. I don't want that involved. I want that to go straight to the body. So this is one. This is the new one that I've just made. So I'll go back to camera view. Actually, let's select it. Sorry. There it is. So it shows up as curve as opposed to deformation, and it's just here. I'm going to transform. Oh, I've still got a strange relationship there. I'm not sure what that is. Hang on.
It's broken the whole thing.
Yeah, like I said, you want to make sure the connections are stable and that it's not talking to anything in a slightly odd manner.
When I try to move the actual body, it just distorts.
Bear with me a second. I'm just going to make sure mine's in order so people are looking at the right information. Yeah, there it is. So that's right. Okay, there we go. Okay, I can't have a look at yours. Okay. It looks like you fixed it. You can only see that. It should just be flexing.
Yeah, earlier when I tried to move it, it just distorted.
Make sure you select that peg on mode. Yeah, so when you're using transform tool, it will just go back to that. Yeah, so that's working. Okay, so a couple of things are happening here. So this is the other way around. So if everyone just pause, I know this is a bit of like a bit of a mind melting moment, but let's just sort of break it down and explain what it is we can see. So there are two components to this type of rig. Okay, there is the offset. The offset is this handle here. Okay, the offset basically is the control point for the rig. The curve is the actual curve itself, like that Bezier curve that we're adding in. So that's the new one I added. Okay, and you can control the curve from the other end as well. Okay, sorry, not the other end as well. Thank you. Okay, so we've got it that way. So this is the opposite way round, and you can see how that might affect different types of objects. Now the important thing to remember here, because I saw someone already say it, my eyes aren't moving. Well, no, they're not moving because you're not controlling the eyes. All of this rig does is controls the shape of the body. So think about it. If you wanted to move the whole body, you wouldn't grab the curve or the offset. In fact, I'm going to put my other one back. Sorry, just quickly. I'm going to put this back because I thought it was better. Simple as that, really. So I'm just going to disconnect this one like so. Move it over here because it's a bit crap. Bring this one back. There we go. And put it in. So this is my old one, like so. So this was the one I liked. It moved the way I wanted it to. But think about it. What you're going to do instead, you're not going to control it from this curve. You're actually going to control it from up here, from the body. Yeah. So you're going to say, look, my object starts over here, and its head shape starts like flexed down or flexed up. Yeah. So it starts like that, and then by the time I get to here, well, I'm going back to my body. Well, now. Let's turn that on so you can see it. You know, by that point, now my body's kind of down here, yeah, and it's going to flex like this way instead. So we're actually sort of taking a bit more control over the object. If we go, I'm going to undo this. I don't want to start messing around with the animation. But they're two separate things. So this offset thing is purely to control the shape of the body. It's not where the body moves. That's a separate control. That's the actual body control. Together, it looks like this. Yeah, so I can say, and this is a great way to think about it. So I'm on my body peg, right? I'm going to hit F6, keyframe that, and then I can actually go in and individually start pulling all of these apart if I wanted to. If I've got the mental capacity needed to control all of these very, very different objects, and they're actually sliding around a bit at the moment. They're a little bit out of control. To sort of round them off. So I'm going to say, look, it all starts from here, you know, like this. So I'm bringing all of my objects together. They're a little bit rigid, some of these shapes. I think they need repairing. It starts like this. Maybe the nose points down slightly, but all in all, that's what it kind of looks like. And then I'll jump to this frame over here. Let's go out a bit. I'll hit F6 again and say, look, this is where it is. Oh, silly me, didn't put animate mode on. So let's get rid of that one. Let's go back here. So we're saying, look, it sits like that, there, and now the body, we're going to move it up here. And it sits like that, and maybe all of the, we could rotate it, so we could say that by that point it's gone like this, and I'm going to go right in. I'm actually going to start like really messing around with these. So let's say all flexed this way somehow. I'm not really planning this animation at the moment. I'm really just sort of making it up as I go along because I just want to show you how quick it is once you've done this level of rigging to actually begin to apply some real change. And then I'm going to bring this one, we need to come up there, up here. The more effort and time and kind of focus you put into the quality of your rigging, you know, the better outcomes you're going to start to get. I'll flex this guy up here slightly. But I've keyframed kind of all of that. And there's the change in animation. So it went from one position to another. If I want to go into like granular detail, I can go down and actually go, well, actually this peg, and I want to isolate it, just that one. I don't actually want it to start down there. start up there. It needs to be kind of more down this way. So I can isolate the individual elements. And like I said, do you remember, going way back, I told you to think about it like Maya? This is how Maya works. You start with big blocks of movement. And then once you're happy with all the big blocks, you go back to the beginning and you start isolating one limb or one element at a time. And deciding, like, I know it goes from here to here and it rotates. Now I'm going to go back and go, well, in that movement, this tentacle moves this way. Yeah? And now I'll go back again, and in the movement again, now this tentacle moves this way. So I can actually go back and start to put in a far greater level of detail where I'm actually just working, with this peg. I'm saying that this peg starts here. By the time we kind of get up to here, it is flexing a little bit. I think I can make it move more dramatically. I think it can come right up. I might even start to pull it out. So I could go, actually, by this point, it's good. Do you remember we talked about that original movement, that like clump, that push movement? So I could say that it's going from that, coming right round. This is a little bit sharp, so I have to round this right off. Yeah, remember this shape? We could say actually it's going more towards that. So as it moves up, it's pulling out. And then go back to the next one. So which guy was it? Where are we? Long tentacles, don't care about those. Short tentacles. This guy just here. So short tentacle 2. And I'll go in and actually start to look at this one as well. So short tentacle 2. Down here, starts like that, that's fine. By the time it gets up here though, I want it to have pulled right out. Even smooth that off slightly. You see how I actually adjusted the shape of it there, fundamentally adjusted it. There we go. So now we're moving on. Silly me, didn't keyframe it. Let's go. 6. I like the way that keyframes work in a non-linear fashion in this as well, which is quite nice. So let's go back here, straighten that out. There we go. So now, can you see how that, I'm just pushing forward on the onion skin so we can see the movement. So now it's kind of moving in that shape that I want. Got that smoothing on as well. And oh, bear in mind, remember, this is before we even give consideration to this thing. Remember this? Yeah, that cinematic view that we created. So we've got that to consider as well. That we're going to get like something really kind of slightly mad with it, just based on that camera angle that I picked. So, start to play around with it. Think about, maybe keep the camera off. You don't want the weird movie camera thing just yet. But just think about those movements. Once you've got all the rigging in place, and you're happy with the actual rigging structure, make sure that it actually makes sense logically. So go to that node view, and sort of look at it and go, right, does this all connect up? Are the right things talking to the right things? If they are, we can theoretically now start the same animation process we went through before. The difference is, by spending 2 hours or 2.5 hours doing this rigging, you can animate 10 times faster than you could if you were doing it hand-drawn. And because these are still whole drawings instead of really hard cut-out shapes, you can get lots of fluidity and kind of lots of detail in the movement. It's now just a case of going through, picking the key points of the whole body, so it starts here, ends here, and then going back to the tentacles and mapping them all and changing their shape over time. One last thing I want to show you, because we're going to finish in a second, we are nearly out of time, is once we've done all that, what we then would start looking at is this library. And it's in the node library that we can start to create some really cool, interesting tools. So, in the node library, we basically have a catalog of objects that behave in a variety of different ways. So for example, under deformation, we've got some really nice deformation tools that we can use to sort of change the way a deformer behaves. So for example, these are our standard deformers. So a lock point, an articulation we added. So if I go into one of these, there you go. So this is one of the deformers. See all the individual bones. So each one of those is a component from here. So you've got your bones, you've got your multiport, and then your multiport out. So that's, which one did I click? Was it this one? So that's what that deformer looks like. Yeah, multiport in, multiport out are these two bits at the end, and then inside it, it is just a bunch of bones in together. But if we wanted to, though, we could start to add some really kind of slightly bizarre deformers as well. So we could add a curve halfway through this if we wanted to. So between two bones. This is where I wreck my squid, by the way. So I've just added a curve between these two bones. And you can see it just there. I hope we're on the right one. No, we're not. There it is. That's what the curve just did. Can you see it's broken it, but it's there. See that curve? So it actually allows you to add like controlled Bezier points between shapes. We should probably go in and fix the rigging on this a little bit because that curve's now just wrecked it. But yeah, it actually allows you to add in some really interesting shapes. If I add in retract's kind of interesting, so I'll drop that in there. Oh no, retract has to go out to a composite. Sorry, can't use retract. Let's get rid of it. Get rid of that. You can add in things like folds. So folds are quite interesting. If you've got a point in your bone where objects get quite tight, so I think down here, the bones 4 and 5, you can add a fold in, and folds are quite interesting because what they basically do, so my fold is just, where is it? Did I go between 4 and 5? 4 and 5. So what a fold does is when you bend an object too hard, so like here for example, and it starts to clip over the top of itself, what a fold will do is it will actually it will try and repair the damage, and I can see where my fold needs help. So my fold actually belongs up there. Whoa. So what my fold has done there, look at the size of that. What my fold has basically done there is it said I can't repair it because the drawing was broken, so it's not going to work. But what it is designed to do is actually repair some of the clipping that occurs. So if you've got two objects, let's just put these back together. Go back to my layers view as well. If I just show you all of them, so what it does, if you've ever got a point where you try and bend everything all at once and it gets a little bit too intense, like they start to clip over themselves, it will try and repair itself. So it will actually go in and go, okay, I need to, this is it with the curve. I need to just repair the clipping here because when you bend this, the two objects fold over the top of one another. So just here, for example, and it will repair that clipping. So especially if you've got arms, so a squid is interesting because it's all wavy and wobbly, but you're going to have humans. Humans have tighter bends. So here's a good example where I've got relatively small shape. So it will repair any of the folding that happens here. Yeah, so it's just gonna repair any folds that occur there and repair any that occur here as well to keep them kind of, mine are quite rounded anyway, But if they're too tight, they'll go over the top of one another and it will repair stuff like that. So that's kind of the next stage, is once we've done this really advanced rigging, is to go into our node library. We've done our rigging, we've done our animation, but we can go into our node library and start adding tools. So those are the deformation tools. I'm not going to get into constraints. You've got the ability to add maps and more cameras. You can add multiple cameras into a scene as well. I am going to do a session on you guys specifically with particle systems. So how to use particles, how to use the bounce, the sync, how to change the life and velocity of objects. So this is everything from obviously obvious things like snow or rain, getting rain to fall down. But it's other things as well, like if you want, everyone always focuses so much on rain, and no one ever thinks about like splashes. And that's something that really bothers me. They always do rain that like passes through the bottom of the lens. Like, so you've got your frame there, and the rain comes through and just disappears out the other side. And then when you look at the actual animation, you can't see rain hitting anything. It's just like a layer over the top. So you can use a particle system and a multiplier to create a short animation. So this is what I'm going to show you guys to do after Easter, actually, probably 2 weeks back after Easter, is I'm going to show you how to animate a splash of water, like a little, and then show you how to use a particle system to multiply that out and then offset it so you get lots of splashes. So things like water bouncing off the floor or bouncing off a surface.
That kind of, like I think that if we watch like GB film, there's like a blur almost around every.
Yeah, you can do that. So you can get like a slight, like a misting almost, isn't it? Where the water breaks up. So there's loads of like tools like that in there. In shading, I want.
From an angle, like get like the three, say it's like.
Oh, we can do it any way you like. We can do it on a path. We can do it on a z-axis. Yeah, there's a million ways. Anything you can do to a drawing, you can do to a particle system effectively in terms of how it moves through a space. These ones are really interesting. This is something that I personally feel can like make or break an animation, which is mapping and shaders. So actually adding three-dimensional lighting into an object. So you know the thing where you create the dark paint and you paint into your drawing? Imagine if you didn't have to do that. You could actually add lights and the lights did the shading for you. I can show you how to do that in 2D as well, so we can get some really nice kind of dynamic lighting. So that's using, they used to call them bump maps, but I can't see that on there now. They've just called them normals and lights, So there's like a million different tools, as well as all the crazy stuff like directional blurs, Gaussian blurs, variables, keying is in there as well. There's loads of stuff. So that's the plan when we come back. Hopefully, this has at least showed you that there is another way to animate. Hand-drawn, hybrid style, and now deformation rigged, kind of full cutout. Have a play with it over Easter. Even if you know what you're doing with your film and it's not Toon Boom, I recommend keep playing with this anyway, because it's a toolbox, isn't it? The more tools you have, and the sharper each one of those tools is, the more useful you are as a tradesperson. But that's it. Yeah, we're kind of done for today. Make sure you save your stuff. I've got this recording done as well. I have done the other upload that finished earlier. So what I'll do next is get this one uploaded. So there'll be 4 parts in total. Okay, that will be available to you. I'm trying to get that done.